Hello, my name is Joel Pullen, and I'm the planning manager for the city of Fremont. In this video, city staff will provide an introduction to the 2023 through 2031 housing element update process. Our presentation will begin with an introduction to the housing element, the relevant legal framework, and the state's role in oversight over the housing element update process. We'll then review recent housing development during the current housing element planning period. Finally, we'll discuss the upcoming housing element cycle and what to expect in the months ahead, including public participation opportunities so that the community can get engaged with the update process. California's housing element law requires that all cities and counties plan for their community's housing needs by including a housing element as one of 7 mandatory elements of their general plan. This housing element is required to identify feasible land sites for housing within the community and to develop a policy agenda for facilitating production of housing units at all income levels. It is specifically required to demonstrate that the jurisdiction has capacity to accommodate a determined share of housing units, which is known as the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA for short. The state has determined that the creation of housing is a matter of statewide importance. The need for safe, affordable housing crosses local and regional jurisdictional lines. The state has an interest in ensuring this housing is located in communities with access to jobs, transportation, education, food, and health services. As a result of the state's interest in ensuring housing is distributed intentionally across regions, a jurisdiction's housing element is subject to substantial oversight by the state. The state imposes a mandatory update timeline, which is currently every 8 years. The housing element must also be certified by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. HCD reviews housing elements to confirm the feasibility of development on identified sites and to ensure that all statutorily required components are included. If a jurisdiction's housing element is deemed out of compliance with state law and not certified by HCD, that jurisdiction loses a substantial amount of local control over zoning regulations until the housing element is brought into compliance. I'll now hand the presentation to Planner Courtney Powell, who will review the city's existing housing element and the changes in our housing needs allocation in the coming cycle. Courtney?
Thank you, Joel. The city's current housing element covers the period from 2015 through 2023. And during this period, the city was assigned a regional housing needs allocation of 5,455 units. As Joel mentioned, we're required to have the zoning to accommodate these units and to report annually on our progress towards their production. Our allocation is further broken down by income category. As you can see on this slide, more than half of our current allocation is for affordable, below market rate housing. This type of housing is typically developed by nonprofit affordable housing developers using funding from the state or local governments, or by private developers who include affordable units within market rate projects to satisfy the requirements of the city's affordable housing ordinance. It is important to distinguish between the city's RHNA requirement and the amount of housing that will actually be produced during the planning period. The city is only required to zone for its RHNA. It's not required to actually produce that housing. And oftentimes the housing produced ends up looking very differently than what is shown in the RHNA allocation share. This chart shows the city's RHNA allocation versus what has actually been produced during the past cycle. While the city has produced more than its entire RHNA allocation, the affordability of those units is not proportional to the RHNA income categories. This slide shows current production trends over the past 2 housing element cycles. New units are not distinguished by income level in this graph. As you can see, there was a spike in production in Fremont in 2017 and 2018. This is associated with the construction of new multifamily residential housing in the Warm Springs Innovation District. Since 2019, building permits issued per year have decreased since that peak, particularly in 2020, when we saw a sharp reduction due to the impacts of COVID-19. This slide shows the location of major projects that were issued building permits in 2021. As you can see, new residential development continues to be concentrated in the Warm Springs Innovation District area, as well as within other areas of the city that are in close proximity to planned and existing transit facilities. Now that we've reviewed our current cycle RHNA, I'd like to discuss our RHNA for the upcoming housing element cycle. State law requires that each jurisdiction plan for its fair share of regional housing needs. The process of determining fair share allocations begins with HCD, who issues a regional housing needs determination to the Regional Council of Governments, which for the Bay Area is the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG. For the 2023 through 2031 cycle, ABAG's regional housing needs determination is over 400,000. After receiving this regional housing needs determination, ABAG then determined allocations for specific local jurisdictions within their region. ABAG determined that allocations through a RHNA methodology that included three primary components: a baseline allocation, factors and weights, and an equity adjustment. The baseline allocation is determined by each jurisdiction's regional total households from the Plan Bay Area 2050 final blueprint. The factors and weights then adjusts that allocation based on access to high opportunity and job proximity. Finally, an equity adjustment was applied to shift lower income unit allocations towards jurisdictions with racial and socioeconomic demographics that indicate greater amounts of segregation and exclusion than the regional average. ABAG's RHNA methodology resulted in a RHNA allocation of 12,897 units for Fremont in the 2023 through 2031 housing element cycle. This is the number of units that we must now plan to zone to accommodate within our housing element update. This slide shows a comparison of both the regional and local housing needs from the past housing element cycle and the upcoming housing element cycle. As you can see, both regional and local allocations increased substantially from the last cycle. This reflects the ongoing regional housing shortage, and particularly the shortage of housing affordable to people with low and very low incomes. Cities around the region have all seen similarly large increases in their RHNA allocation as Fremont. This slide shows the breakdown of the city's upcoming RHNA by income level. You'll notice that the relative share of housing at each income level needed has remained relatively consistent with the last cycle, even though our overall allocation has increased. I will now hand the presentation over to Principal Planner Wayland Lee, who will provide a brief introduction to the housing element update process.
Thanks, Courtney. Fremont's housing needs allocation is significantly higher in this housing element cycle than it has been in previous cycles. However, despite the significant increase in our allocation, Fremont is well positioned to accommodate our RHNA allocation without a need to make significant changes to existing zoning that's currently in place. The reason that the city is well positioned is that the city's 2011 general plan, which is the city's principal planning document, was forward thinking and that it anticipated future housing needs and set into place a strategy for accommodating those needs within transit-oriented developments near our major transit hubs, as well as within our city center and downtown districts. The map on this slide highlights the city's designated priority development areas, or PDAs, which generally radiate a half mile from the city's BART stations and ACE train station and tracks along the city's primary north-south transit spine. Most future residential development is anticipated to occur primarily in these PDAs in areas zoned for multifamily residential development. This growth strategy aligns with the city's broader goal of reducing vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions based on our climate and sustainability goals. There are essentially 6 mandatory components of a housing element update. The first component is an evaluation of the previous housing element. This section compares the differences between what was projected or planned in the previous housing element and what was actually achieved. It identifies any reasons for these shortcomings and describes how programs in the updated element are being changed or adjusted to incorporate what's been learned the past 8 years. Staff's initial review of the previous housing element indicates that the city was particularly successful in producing affordable housing. In fact, the city nearly doubled the amount of affordable housing produced in this period than in the previous period. However, even then, we're still only meeting approximately 30% of the city's overall RHNA allocation at the lower income levels, which serves to show how great the need for affordable housing is and how difficult it is to produce it. With even more affordable units assigned to the city of Fremont within the next planning period, the housing element will need to continue to consider policies to produce more affordable housing going forward. The second component of an update is an analysis of this community's housing needs. This section will look at a demographic profile of the community, as well as a profile of our current housing stock. It also analyzes the housing needs of special populations, including people with disabilities, seniors, and unhoused. The third component is a sites inventory, which is a list of sites that have zoning in place and the capability to accommodate our housing needs at all different income levels. The fourth component is an analysis of potential constraints to housing production. The city is statutorily required to review the impact of its policies on constraining housing production, including zoning standards such as parking requirements, building heights, unit size requirements, local processing and permit procedures, including typical processing times, permit submittal requirements, and requirements for subjective findings or standards. Fees and exactions, including impact fees and affordable housing fees charged by the city. The fifth component is an analysis of fair housing. This is a new requirement for this housing element cycle that requires jurisdictions to include an analysis of how the city will affirmatively further fair housing. And by affirmatively furthering fair housing, I mean taking meaningful actions to replace segregated living patterns in our communities with integrated living patterns, addressing disparities in housing needs and in access to opportunity, and transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. The sixth component is a list of goals, policies, and implementation programs that create a game plan for the housing element planning period. The policies and programs are specific actions that the city will take to alleviate the constraints to housing that have been identified. Going forward, we're looking to provide numerous opportunities and various means for public participation in the housing element update process. We're encouraging people interested in the process to go to our website, www.fremont.gov/housing element, where they can sign up to be notified of future meetings and other updates regarding the housing element. We're also offering members of the public the ability to schedule office hours with the housing element project team. Residents can sign up for office hours online on the project website and talk to the project team about the housing element update and ask questions. The website will also be updated with information regarding upcoming community meetings. In conclusion, the city's housing element update team is interested in hearing your input. Please reach out with any feedback and questions using the link to the website in this slide. Thank you.